Well, here is another young lady compared to me. She's we have the same alma mater. You recognize these, of course, and some of you are well aware of the colors that we show. The course description for you today is as following: the Sahel
Yep. Sahel.
region of West Africa has been plagued with insecurity and political unrest since the Arab Spring uprisings of 2010, 2011. Already.
Mm-hmm.
Terrorist activity has been on the rise, and democratically elected governments have been toppled by military juntas, the most recent of which occurred in Niger in 2023, so not that long ago. Drawing upon her more than 15 years of experience and working in Niger, as CEO of the Remember Niger Coalition, Kara VanderKamp will discuss the many and immense challenges in the Sahel region and at the same time offer a hopeful perspective. So that's good to know. And Kara did receive a BA from Hope College and a master's in international educational development from Columbia. In 2009, she founded the Remember Niger Coalition. It's a nonprofit organization dedicated to unifying people and mobilizing resources to expand quality education opportunities in Niger through partnerships with Nigerian organizations. And I wanted to just mention that we really have a little bit of a celebrity on our dais today, because she is 1924, is that correct? Or no, excuse me, 2024
Yeah.
winner of the Hopi Award. She's a student athlete at Hope College. And so the award goes to someone who has done something wonderful for humanity. And Kara is the winner of that award last year. So I think that deserves a round of applause.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you to listen and learn from Kara. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for having me here with you today. It's a pleasure. Yeah, I've been looking forward to this for quite a while, and I've got to tell you, I want to start by saying that when I proposed this as a class, as a course, it was in 2023. And I think as I was starting to think about it, it was actually before Niger had its coup. And then there was the coup, and all of these different things have been happening. And so as I've been planning the course, every time something new happens, I have to say, oh, let me change kind of the way I'm going to do this. So yeah, it's a crazy part of the world, and we'll talk more about that. So I wanted to tell you kind of how I see today going, this morning going. We'll start with introductions. I want to hear a little bit from you and your experience in Africa. Maybe why did you choose to take this course? I think that would be very interesting to hear. Maybe some of you have experience in West Africa. And then I want to talk a little bit about the current situation, and then talk about the destabilizing factors in the Sahel. And I'll say right now, there is so much information that I could give you. So this is kind of going to be the 30,000 foot perspective. And then if you want to dive into something, if you want to talk more about something that we were discussing that's on here, this is where it'd be really great to get questions. Or if you have experience with anything that we're talking about, I'd love to hear from you as well. And those folks online also, we can do questions that way as well. And then we're going to talk a little bit about why does this matter to us as Americans? What's going on over in Africa, in the Sahel region? So what are the U.S. strategic interests there in that area? And then, of course, we want to end with optimism, because I truly do believe that there's a lot of hope for that area. And we'll talk about that and why there is hope, where that comes from. And then we'll go into like some of the things that we can do here to help the situation in the Sahel and all of that. So could we start right now, if people are willing? I am so curious as to why you picked this course. Like, what was it that struck you about this course? If people would just be willing. Yes, go ahead. Maybe say your name and then why you decided to choose this course.
Oh yeah, I'm Malcolm Hallam. There are two specific things. One is a while back I read a book called The 10th Parallel,
Okay.
an older book, I think, but it talked about the conflict from West Africa through to Asia in that region from the equator
Oh,
and the
yeah.
Great South, and how conflict, terrorism, um, religious
Mhm.
persecution, those kind of things went on, but seemed to be closely related to the basic human needs of finding food and shelter
Mhm.
with climate variations, weather changes, things like that.
Yeah.
So something really very basic and fundamental driving conflict between people.
Yeah.
So that was the one thing. And the other thing is we've recently, my wife Sheila as well, recently moved from New Jersey, where we were members of an RCA church that sponsored a couple of RCA missionaries, the Bibelt, who were working
Oh, yeah.
in Niger until around the time of the conflict.
Yep.
Back in the US now, because it's a bit too dangerous. But so we heard a lot of up close and personal from them
Yep.
about what was going on there.
Yeah. So the Bebouts are friends of mine. I know them quite well. So yeah. Thank you. Anybody else want to? Got a couple different people here.
So I've written 4 books about collaboration skills and I was looking for other tact alternatives.
Okay, that makes me nervous now.
Uh,
Like,
There's no conflict
we're
here.
up and to give the course, I think.
There's no conflict here.
Yeah. Okay, I think we got one more person over here, a couple people over here.
Yeah, 30 years ago, I camped in Niger. I was on an overland trip across the continent of Africa.
Okay.
And went through Niger. I remember camping outside of Agadez and seeing uranium mine lights in the distance,
Yeah.
and visiting in the marketplace where the meat was stretched out on tables of sticks tied together, and the vultures were on the buildings above,
Yeah.
waiting for their moment. Also, I became a bird watcher in that process. Just north of the Sahel in Algeria, I saw my first bird that piqued my interest, and I think my second bird was in Niger.
Okay.
And subsequent to that, in 2014, I was bird watching in Cameroon, and we had to have a military escort to do that in northern Cameroon.
Yeah.
And so, you know, and from Niger, we were not able to go through Nigeria
Yeah.
when I was camping because of the conflicts that were occurring there. So we had to skirt into Chad.
Yeah.
So the area still has an interest in me. And so I wanted to see what's happening now.
Yeah. That's great. What year was it that you were in Niger?
85.
85. Okay. Thank you. This is great. We're getting a lot of good experience here.
Yes, Barb Springer Seelig. My daughter and her husband were assigned to work in the embassy in Zambia in September.
Okay.
And I've just realized how little I knew about that whole part of the world. So I'm just trying to fill this void that my education
Yeah.
did not.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. It's good. Okay. One more, and then I think I'll tell you about me, about my experience there.
Seems like every time I hear about Africa, it's negative.
Yes.
It's a disaster. And
Yeah.
I know news has a tendency to emphasize the negatives, so I'm here to get a bigger perspective. What are the dangers? What are the negatives? What are the hopes involved?
Yep. Yep. That's great. Thank you. That's good. Okay. Did anybody respond online? Let me ask that. No. Okay. All right. That's good. That's fine. Okay. Well,
And really quickly, I'm sorry. For those of you online, we're having trouble with the camera inside of the classroom. I know you can hear Cara and see the presentation, but they can't see you, Cara. We'll continue to work that.
okay. Well, we're going to go to some slides here, so I think maybe it'll be okay. So my first experience actually in Africa, right after college, right after I graduated from Hope College, I went to Kenya, which is on the other side of Africa in the east side. And I was teaching missionary children there. I went with the Reformed Church in America. And before that, I mean, honestly, I was just looking for an adventure. And I didn't think about Africa. I mean, it wasn't like, oh, I really want to get there. But once I got there and worked there, had friends in the area, I just had such a wonderful experience that I like to say it kind of got caught in my heart. And so I came back after 2 years and knowing that I would like to go back at some point. And I ended up teaching in Chicago for 4 years and then went to grad school to get my master's degree. And about that time, Debbie Broxma, maybe some of you might know her from the Reformed Church in America. She said to me before I went to grad school, she said, there's a job available in Niger in West Africa. We'd love to send you over there. It's through the Presbyterian Church. And I said, well, I'm going to grad school. And so she's like, okay. And then after 2 years, I asked her, I said, well, is that still available? And sure enough, it was. So that's how I ended up in Niger. And I'm going to stop for just a second and say, I'm saying Niger. We typically here in the United States say Niger, but it is a foreign colony of France. And so Niger would be the pronunciation. That's how Nigerians say it. So anyway, back to what I was saying, I was sent by the Presbyterian Church to work with the Evangelical Church of Niger. And they had a vision for a Christian school system, and they want to do that by starting schools through their local churches. And so I got there, and I'm going to tell you this, like I had lived in Kenya, and I thought, somewhat naively, I thought, oh, this will be very similar, they'll be the same. It was so different. There were similarities, but West Africa, what I find is West Africa and East Africa are very, very different, and particularly the countries that are in the Sahel region, which I'll show you a map in just a second of where that all is. But this is my group. This was about 20 years ago, 2006. And this is the group of people that I was working with from the church. And so we were starting schools in Niger through these local churches. And what I realized was I felt like they have the knowledge, they knew what they were doing. But what they really needed were more partners and more funding to get these schools up and running. And so I thought, well, I could come back to the United States and be more helpful I didn't know at the time I was going to start a nonprofit, but I thought I could come back and help them find more partners. And then one thing led to another, and we started the Remember Niger Coalition. And so since 2009, that's basically what I have been doing is I'm the CEO of the Remember Niger Coalition. And we started with 3 schools that we support in Niger. And we had about 400 students at those schools. We now have 19 school partners. Yeah, and we have 19 school partners with about 5,200 students. And so the way we operate, we still operate the same way as we support Nigerian leaders and organizations, primarily churches, but we have ventured out. And so they want to start a school for their community, for their children, and they operate their schools and programs. And I think the fact that we've been able to go from 3 or 4 school partners in the beginning to 19, it really demonstrates how desperate people are for quality education. And most of the church leaders who I worked with, they had the opportunity to go to the mission school that was started by SIM, which is called Serving in Mission. Back in the day, it was the Sudan Interior Mission. But they had the opportunity to go to that school, and so they were impacted by that education. And so most of our partners, they want to provide that same education to their children and to the children in their community. And the reason this is like they're so desperate for it is only half of all children in Niger, in that country, have the opportunity to go to school. And of that half, on average, they only go for 2 years. And that's the same story across the Sahel. Niger is, in fact, the least educated country in the world. But you'll see some statistics about the rest of the Sahel too. That's pretty much the same, within the ballpark of these other countries also. So we partner with Christian schools, girls' schools. We have a school for the deaf, school for children with disabilities, and we also do work with public schools. But you can see that we really focus on what I would say from Matthew 25, the least of these, right? When Jesus talks about, the king will reply, truly, whatever you did for the least of these, my brothers and sisters, you did for me. And so that's where our heart is. That's where we really focus. So I can get more into that, but I want to get into the presentation. And I wanted to give you where I'm coming from, also my perspective as the presenter, because everything is being filtered through my perspective. And it doesn't mean that the facts are facts, but as far as my opinion, that's where I'm coming from. So the Sahel region, it depends on which website you go to, by the way, what is considered the Sahel. So this is a good map, but you can see, I think it has 9 countries involved, but it goes all the way from the west side of Africa to the east side. And you can also, we all know, I don't want to be but this is the Sahara Desert up here, right? And so the Sahel is basically that area under the Sahara Desert where it's still livable. Like they do have a rainy season once a year, and so they can grow crops and they can have animals and all of that. So I think on this particular map, we're missing Guinea. They do include Nigeria in there, but I would say probably just the top half of Nigeria would be included. I think South Sudan, it would be important to include South Sudan also. I'm trying to think what else. Some of Algeria would be considered part of the Sahel region also. And so I think one of the interesting things about this, and we'll come back to this idea, but this region is home to the youngest population in the world. 65% of the people in this area, they're under the age of 25. In Niger, 50%, I know this fact for Niger is that 50% of the people in Niger are under the age of 15. And, some of the highest birth rates in the world are in this region. Niger has the highest birth rate. The average woman will have over 7 children in her lifetime. So, yeah, there's a lot going on over there. So I want to talk a little bit about what is the current situation, because it's ever changing, ever evolving. So I think what we hear a lot about here in the United States is the terrorism and the extremism. And so I wanted to start with Africa in general, but basically the Sahel has become the global epicenter of terrorism. So it accounts for over half of all terrorist activity in the world. And so you can see the different pockets of areas that where there's terrorist activity, and then the number of deaths so that are associated with that. So this is kind of an astounding thing. If you start at that bottom bullet point, in 2003, there were almost 4,000 fatalities, which was nearly a tenfold increase from the year before. But go up to that second bullet point there were an estimated 10,400 deaths linked to militant Islamist violence in the Sahel. So we're seeing a pattern here. It's not getting better, right? Like that's what we know for sure. It's definitely getting worse. And so you've got in Niger and in this, like the Sahel region, this part of it, you have two main groups. And I'm not going to say them out loud, but they're so you have two main groups. That you have four, but there's really two main groups. And then also you guys have probably all heard of, like, in Nigeria with Boko Haram. I feel like that's been in the news quite a bit in the past probably 3 to 5 years. We've heard a lot about that. But there's also what has been impacting, I know, Niger, where I live. There's another group that's coming up from this part of Niger, that's not Boko Haram, and it's been causing a lot of issues in the southern, kind of most western part of Niger. So, yeah. So there was a great article in the Washington Post recently. I brought a couple copies along, but a lot of my statistics and maps come from here, and I just wanted to point that out. It was the center section of a Sunday newspaper back in February, and it's a cool section, because an informative section, because I think what the author tried to do, Rachel Chasen, was give you the perspective of different players in that region. And so, like, she goes from, like, maybe somebody who's a member of the terrorist network to an American soldier, to one of the leaders of the military leaders in this area. But because of the insecurity, because of the instability in that region, and because of the, like, which we're going to talk about all the different ways in which it is impacted by instability, there have been military juntas, I believe is the way that we pronounce that, in, I think it's been 5 countries over the past 13 years. And so, like, Sudan, in some ways, I think of Sudan as its own situation. It's a little bit separate from the rest of the Sahel, what's going on there, because they're really experiencing a civil war, which, if you come over to more Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, they aren't experiencing civil wars. It's basically military leaders took over. They took advantage of a situation that wasn't stable, and they're all a little bit different, but they are all of the military leaders are coming at it from this area, from Mali, Niger, and Burkina, and Guinea too, that the insecurity is getting so bad, and they're sick and tired of the democratic elected, officials not being able to protect the people. And so that's where they're coming at it. And Niger is, I think, even more unique, and that's probably where more of my knowledge is. But there is truth in what they're saying, that the government hasn't been able to provide for its people. There's a lot of corruption. And so the leaders in Niger are saying, the new leaders, the military leaders, are saying they want to root that out. And they want to provide a foundation for the country so that they can go back to democratic leaders. Now, will that happen? We'll see, but that's what they're saying right now. And we could talk more about that too if anybody has questions on it. It will be further in the presentation also. So the U.S. had a military presence in this region. And you can see though, year after year, they've been asked to leave these different countries. So let me talk a little bit about Niger, which just recently was the most recent country, Chad and Niger, where the U.S. was asked to leave. The problem, the big issue in this part of the world, and I'm oversimplifying this, but and we can talk more about it, but is these are former colonies of France. And this could be a whole course in and of itself, and I'm a little bit biased, I'm going to just say up front, because, I'm looking at it from the Nigerian perspective, and I kind of agree with them. So France, they left in 1960. They were kicked out of Niger, but they never really left. And they've been meddling in these countries ever since. They've been taking resources out of these countries ever since. Now, it's debatable whether or not they've helped the countries further progress, probably. But the people I know in Niger have not appreciated the way in which they've been actively participating, behind closed doors mostly. And again, I could talk about that, but that's a big part of the issue is that they were immediately, like in Niger, once the coup happened, the coup d'etat, they were kicked out almost immediately of the country. And then the U.S. responded in such a way that, so the U.S. didn't respond in a way that the Nigerians were happy with, and so they also were asked to leave. However, in hindsight, I don't necessarily think I think that was always the way it was going to go, that the U.S. was going to be asked to leave, and I'll talk about that in just a second. And then the U.S. because of other things going on in the world, primarily the Ukraine situation, the U.S. had to be very careful about how they, how do I say this? Like how they supported France in this situation, because they need each other, or they did need it. Of course, things have changed, but they needed each other at that time. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I don't see any hands going up. So if you have anything, comments or anything, please feel free to. Okay, so this is the current Russian presence in Niger. And so you can see, of course, they've been in Sudan for a while, and then they went into Mali, Burkina Faso, and then Niger. So basically, when France was kicked out, when the United States was kicked out of this or asked to leave out of this part of the region, then Russia came in. And the way Russia has worked in the past is the Wagner group, mercenary groups, and they have been rebranded as the Africa Corps, which probably sounds a little bit better than the Wagner group. But if you know the history of that as well, how the leader of the Wagner group was, taken out. He was in a plane crash. So we don't know for sure that he was taken out. I shouldn't say that. Yeah, exactly. But so, it's all very complicated. But basically what they have done is they've gone into these countries, not just in the Sahel, but also in other parts of Africa. And then the military leaders pay Russia, pay these soldiers to protect them and protect their people, and they pay them with resources from their country, so primarily gold. The interesting thing about Niger is that, yes, Russia has come in, they've provided some weapons, and they've apparently provided training on those weapons, but I haven't seen Russians I mean, I've seen some Russians, but you don't see a huge presence of Russians there. And the military leader there has said, Chiani is his name, Chiani has said that they're not interested in having soldiers come in. They just want the training, they just want the weapons. So thinking about the Sahel region, there's a lot of different factors that, and this is to me where it gets really complicated, because these are all causes of the destabilization, but they're also symptoms. It's very much cyclical the way it works because they all play on each other. And so unfortunately, I think what's happening is it's cyclical. It's like we're going in a downward spiral right now. And so you can see, like at the top, we have the extremism, and then we have the displacement of people, weak governance and institutions, international crime, which you really don't hear a lot about in that part of the world. But I wonder if that's maybe the biggest, one of the, like even bigger than the extremism, or if the international crime allowed the extremism to come in there. We'll talk about that. We'll do a quick overview of that. Climate change, of course, you were talking about that. That's plays into all of this as well, which then impacts food insecurity. But food insecurity isn't just climate change. There's also other factors that play into that, and then disinformation also. And I think this is something that's really important for us to look at, because I think we have a worldwide disinformation problem right now, and it just makes things worse. So this is Ibrahim. His story is told in the Washington Post article. I wanted to talk about, like, give a little bit of his story, because I think he's impacted by all of these different factors. He became one of the terrorists in Niger. And the way it happened, he lives in Western Niger, over by Burkina Faso and Mali, where most of this activity is happening. And he lived in a village. His father had a general store where he sold goods to the community, and it was a pretty good life, it sounds like, from the story. And but terrorists came into his village, and they destroyed the general store. They destroyed a lot of property. They killed people, and Ibrahim was left with very, very few options as to what to do. And when these terrorists come into these different areas, they're forcing people to follow Sharia law. And Niger, I can speak for Niger, and Mali and Burkina, well, Burkina's different. Mali and Niger are Muslim countries. About 98% of the people in Niger identify as Muslim. But there was never, up until about the early 2000s, there was never extremism there. And it's been slowly coming into the country. But so for Ibrahim, this was not in his village. They didn't follow Sharia law. They weren't conservative. They prayed 5 times a day. They did everything that they were supposed to as good Muslims, but they didn't follow Sharia law, and they weren't real strict. So he didn't have very many options. So he decided that he was going to go to Mali, where they have gold mines up in the Gao area. And so he went up there, but what he didn't realize is that this particular gold mine was controlled by the terrorists. And so he got there, and they offered to pay him a certain amount of money to join the group. And it seemed like a good deal, because he could, he probably wouldn't make that much money working in the gold mines. It was more lucrative for him to join the terrorist group. So he joined the group, and he ended up, what he says in the article is that he said, it's almost like being in the military. You have your battles and everybody is like a family. They're like your brothers. And he said, when you win a battle, you know, everybody feels really good about it. But what he was really disturbed by was the fact that it was a lot of brutality. And the Islam that he knew was not violent, was not brutal. And he said one instance in particular struck him was they were going through a village and they saw a woman out collecting firewood and she wasn't wearing a head covering. And so apparently some of the people who were with Ibrahim had seen this woman before and told her, they gave her a warning, you have to wear a head covering. And so they stopped and they pulled her aside and they said, you know, we warned you and now we're going to have to kill you. And the woman was pleading for her life and Ibrahim just kind of watched this all happening and they killed her. And after that, I think that was just too much for him. And so he and some other people went to Niamey, the capital of Niger, where there was a program to get people out of this terrorist activity, these young men. And they, so he went there, but he said because of funding, that program sort of disappeared. And when the author of this article was talking to him, he was getting messages from the terrorist group, members of the terrorist group, to come back, please come back. And he said, you know, I really don't want to, but I can only be patient so long. And really, like, what that exemplifies to me is the fact that that story is that there's so few options in Niger, in Mali, in Burkina. He doesn't, I'm assuming, she didn't talk about his education, but I'm assuming he doesn't have a lot of education, if any at all. What do you do? What do you do when there's nothing open to you? You don't have a way of getting a job. You don't have a way of making money. Your livelihood has been taken away from you. So, and all of these different factors plays into Ibrahim's circumstance, and not just Ibrahim, you know, thousands, millions of young men in Niger. So let's quickly go through each of these and just talk about the ways in which they interact with one another, these different factors. So basically, you're talking about weak governments and weak institutions in this region. It's an incredibly poor area. And so the states themselves just don't have the resources to be able to provide for the people in their country. And so health, education, food systems have yet to meet the demands of the region's rapid demographic expansion. So, you know, the Sahel, the central Sahel, there's about 100 million people there. It's expected to double by 2050. And so if the health and education systems can't provide now, what's going to happen later? And so this graph here, this chart here, this is the United Nations Human Development Index. And you can see all of the countries in the Sahel basically round up, they're at the bottom of the barrel as far as development. And so life expectancy in Sudan is 55 years, Chad 54, 62. That's really, I think, indicative of the health system there. The child mortality rate is really, really high in all of these countries. In Niger, it's between 10 and 15%. So the kids who die before the age of 5, about 10 or 15%. So, and then you can look at the GDP, the literacy rate, again, another indication of education in the countries. And so it's hard. I think it's, you know, we're asking a lot of these governments when they don't have a lot of resources. It's sometimes we like to blame them, but I also think, you know, if you don't have the money to help create these systems like health systems, education systems, it's really tough. And I can speak for Niger, is that they're tired of the aid organizations coming in and telling them exactly how to solve the problems in their country with education, with health, with military, with, you know, all of these different things. And so it's a big part of the reason they asked everybody to leave. And they continue to ask aid organizations to leave, like the Red Cross was just asked to leave because they come in and they're trying to, they don't even tell the government what they're doing. They come in with millions, billions of dollars in aid, and they don't work with the government. And so I think they're getting kind of tired of that. I'm not saying that they did the right thing, but I can also understand that's not necessarily the best model to use. So climate change is a big one, and the African Sahel, which is considered the climate hotspot, it experiences unparalleled rises in temperature, high precipitations variability, and more intense and frequent weather extreme events than the rest of the world. And I can tell you from experience that that's absolutely true. I've been in Niger since 2006. It's getting much, much worse as far as the heat. Last year, so right now we're in the hot season in Niger. It gets up into the 110s, 120s, and it's hot. And it's hotter than when I was there in 2006. But that doesn't mean every year is hotter. Like, you know, a couple of years ago, it was actually a reasonable hot season. So, but what you're finding is like, it's the variables are so different. And the same thing with rain. We're having a lot of flooding. I think you'll, so what's like, what I find fascinating is that you'll have flooding in one part of Niger, so you're having way too much rain, and then another part, it's basically like a drought. And I think this is, you know, you're finding this all over the world, but especially in the Sahel area. So the desert is also increasing, and then of course it impacts food security and conflict and displacement. Uh, the other thing I would say is you have different people groups, and this is, I'm not going to talk a lot about this in this presentation, but again, it could be a whole section, is that you have different people groups in Niger. In Niger, you only have 9 different people groups, but you have your pastoralists and nomadic people, and then you have your farmers, right? And then you have semi-nomadic people and sedentary people, and there's a lot of conflict in that between those people groups. And so I think what's interesting about that is like, and sad, is that as they're losing land where they're like animals can go to find food, you're having more and more conflict because those animals have to go somewhere. They have to eat. And so they will go through the farmlands of the sedentary people, like the Hausa people who are farmers. And so they'll go through that area. And then, I mean, there's a lot of violence and there's a lot of killing because of that. And we have a school up in kind of the middle of Niger that we support, a school partner. And I remember talking to a lot of the fathers. They came to the school so that I could talk to the parents. And I was asking them, you know, like, talk about the experience, like your experience. How did you get here? Why are your kids at this school? And the story I kept hearing over and over again was they said, well, I used to have lots of cows, lots of goats, lots of sheep, but because of the dry weather, they've died. They all died. I couldn't find enough food for them. So we came to Tawa so that I could find, it's a city. And so we came here to find food, like for our family. Basically, I wanted to find a job. And they're putting their kids in school because he said, I never want my kids to be in this situation. All I know are animals, right? That's all I know. I have no other skills. And so he was really, or the fathers were really determined that their kids would have more opportunities available to them. So, and then food insecurity, this is a huge, huge problem. As of December 2024, the Sahel region has experienced a severe food security crisis. And I'll tell you, I see that. Like, I left Niger, I've been here since mid-February. People are already suffering in Niger for a variety of reasons, for all of these reasons that we're talking about. Projections indicate that between June and August of 2025, basically right now, approximately 52.7 million people in West and Central Africa are expected to face acute hunger. So here's the thing about the Sahel region. 98% of people in Niger are subsistent farmers. And it's a little bit lower for the whole region, it's about 70%. But we all know that means you eat what you grow. The harvest is generally in August and September. That food has to last the entire year, and it doesn't. And so for right now, we're coming up to, what is it, March? So April, May, June, those are known as that's known as the hunger season in that part of the world, because people are truly hungry. They're getting about one meal a day. Parents often skip meals so that their kids can eat. And this is like something that's common, but it's getting worse. And again, go back to the weak governance. The government is unable to help people with, finding food. It's so hard for people. So this picture actually this was at our school for kids with disabilities. This was right after the coup. We decided we had to help. Like, we had to figure out a way to help, even though we're education. That's what we do, is we support education. But it was just so bad that you can't watch people just suffer, right? So we gave each family at this particular school a bag of rice, a bag of beans, and oil. And that lasted those families about a month. That was it. It was about, I think, $60 or $70 for the month. But they were able to live off of that. So because things are bad this year, we're already thinking we're going to have to do the same thing. And we're probably going to have to do it at a bigger scale. We're going to have to do it for more of our families. And so let me talk about displacement, and then we can put this all together. So because of climate change, because of the fact that people don't have the land for their animals to find food, because of the food crisis, because of terrorism, you have a lot of displacement, right? You have a lot of displacement in this part of the world. And you can see that Nigeria, over 2 million people, really 3 million people in Nigeria, in the northern part of Nigeria, have been displaced. And that's extremism. That's like Boko Haram. And then you have in Niger, it's less, but a lot of people have been coming over to Niger from these other countries. And so you've got an incredibly poor, underdeveloped country having to take refugees in, right? Like, you could see how this cycles, right? And then you've got Mali, Burkina Faso, this small country, has been ravaged by terrorism and extremism. When I first got to that part of the world, Burkina was like sort of this like shining light. Everybody was like, how did Burkina develop? How did they get so far beyond where Niger is and these other countries in the Sahel? And now Burkina, like, it's incredibly unsafe to go into Burkina Faso. I have friends who their parents have had to leave their villages because of, like Ibrahim, the story I told you. The terrorists go into villages, basically take everything there, force people to follow Sharia law, and it's really a dangerous situation in Burkina and Mali, Niger. You can see Sudan again. That's all the civil war. The problem over there is the civil war. And then disinformation. So disinformation, yeah, it's a huge problem on the internet. It's amazing number of people in Niger and in the Sahel have cell phones, and they're on the internet, and they see people are making videos of things that are happening that aren't really true. So I can give you one example that friends of mine showed me a video in Niger of the French bringing a container full of weapons to the terrorists. And people believe these things. Now, I mean, I can't say one way or another if it's not true. I have my opinion that it's not true, that didn't happen. Because I was like, and I said to my friends, I'm like, why would the French do that? But when there's a history of France meddling in these countries, people believe it. Like there just has to be a hint of truth, right? And then people believe it. And it causes so many problems because of it. And so like in basically like that's a great example of how the coup leaders, the military leaders, they take that information, they take that sentiment and those feelings, and then they use that for power. So they kick the French out. In Niger here, the borders are closed with Benin. This little country right here is Benin. And why does that make a difference in Niger? Because all the goods go into Cotonou in Benin, and they come up through Benin and they go to Niger. Medical goods, food, you name it, wood, cement, like all of these things come through Benin, but the borders are closed. And so it's causing food insecurity as well. It's causing prices to go higher. So right now for Niger, what they have to do is they're now going into Togo, right? So they go into Togo and they have to come up here. They have to get a military escort for a caravan of goods to go up through Burkina into Niger. So not only can you not get as much stuff, enough goods, supplies into Niger, but it's far more expensive. And so, and that's all because Niger, the coup leaders believe that Benin, their leaders are helping the French. So it's all of this all plays together. And then real quickly, I want to talk about international crime. So you have a lot of crime going through, and organized crime going through this part of the world. And so you've got fuel trafficking, which there's a huge black market for gas, for fuel. The smuggling of migrants. So migrants are going up through Niger, through Mali, up to Europe. It's huge, the amount of money that people will pay to get to Europe, right? They want hope. They want a better future for themselves. And then you have drug trafficking. You have drugs coming from South America. They go up through these countries. Firearms, gold, there's gold mines there. And then trafficking in medical products. And very briefly, I'll just show you this map so you can see. I just find it so fascinating. There's a few things I find fascinating about this. One, you can see the different, like, so this is gold right here, the drugs. I mean, often in Niger, I would hear about the government taking drugs, like finding loads of drugs coming through, and then they would, on the news, show bonfires of them supposedly, like burning the drugs. But a lot of what occurs over there, and I believe like the kidnappings, at least in Niger and Mali, are associated more with the criminal activity than really with the terrorism. And then there's also like, yes, there is the extremism, but those extremists are also often the criminals who are doing this type of activity. So it's all mixed together, and it's hard. I want to show you something, though. I've got two maps side by side. So this is the extremism, And this is the map of the criminal activity, which I find really interesting because they correlate, right? Um, so this was 2024 extremism. This is from the Washington Post article. And then this is the activity, that the criminal activity going through this part of the world. And what I think is interesting also, so in Niger, the U.S. had two military bases in Niger. And so you kind of you can see that, and I wonder about is, Niger is relatively calm, you can see on the map, compared to Burkina and Mali and Nigeria. So it'll be interesting to see, and a little scary too, to be honest, if that activity is going to increase in Niger now because the U.S. is not there. Because there is Agadez, which is kind of up by this end there in Niger, a little bit below that. Agadez is a city where you talked about, you know where Agadez is. A lot of the migrants go up through Agadez, and that's exactly where the U.S. had a base. And so it'll be interesting just to see how things change in the next year or so with that. So U.S. strategies and interest in the Sahel. Can I ask you, could you just tell me, what do you think the U.S. interest in the Sahel is? Why did we have 2 military bases in Niger? Can anybody have any guess? Like, what's that? To prevent Russia. Yes, I would agree with that. Good. Anything else? Why would we care what's going on the other side of the ocean? Why would our government care? Okay, resources. Yes. So oil, uranium. So resources, like maybe not even for us, because like the French take the uranium, or they used to, they no longer do, take the uranium out of there. The Chinese take the oil out of Niger. But so I think like they wanted to protect those resources for their allies, not necessarily China, but like for France, but also they wanted to make sure that other people didn't get those resources. So I think that's an excellent point. Any other ideas? Why else would we be over there? Rightly or wrongly, why would we be in Niger? Prevention. Yeah, exactly. So that the extremism doesn't spread. That's right. I think I'll go to the next slide. Um, so counterterrorism and security, like you talked about, but I would question whether or not that terrorism would actually make its way here to the United States. So I think it's just regionally, like our regional interests in that area. So regional stability and governments, again, same thing. Great power competition. So we talked about Russia. Migration and humanitarian concerns. There was a period of time, I don't know if you guys remember this, but I think it was pre-COVID when the migrants were coming up through over the Mediterranean. Do you remember that? In Germany, I mean, it's caused a lot of problems for Europe because Germany at that time accepted a lot of those migrants, and then other countries were not accepting them. So when that was happening, actually, you saw Germany suddenly had a military presence in Niger. Italy came down to Niger. Suddenly, all these European countries had an interest in stopping the flow from where it was starting. And then alliances and partnerships, talking about France, talking about Europe, like they have interest there, so we need to work with them. And then, of course, global health and disease. That's a big one. We don't know where our next pandemic is going to come from, and Ebola is in that area. And so we need to, I think the U.S. has an interest in making sure that we figure those things out before they get to the United States. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't think so. Like you're saying more of like a soft colonization. Is that what you're thinking of? Like, yeah, I would think so when we came into to Niger, I can speak about Niger. they were the United States military is very good at working with other countries. And so they supposedly let Niger take the lead, and then they assisted them, and they did trainings and different types of activities like that. But they were very well appreciated. Like the Nigerians like the Americans. I think one of the articles I was reading about this is, and I think this is probably true, the reason they were asked to leave though is because I think it was quite evident to the Nigerians over the course of 10 years that the United States was there for them, not for the Nigerians. And partly because they were putting most of their focus on their own interests and not like in education, not in healthcare. They really weren't helping the people. Whether it was true or not, the perception was by the people that the United States wasn't there to help them in that way. So I think they weren't necessarily trying to take over, but they weren't also like helping the people as much as they probably should. I think they said, like the article I was reading, 80% of the money was being put into military and 20% was being put into like more social service type things. So yes. Mm-hmm. It's,
In the context that you're now describing military, are you and other NGO organizations that might be there?
mm-hmm. Are we? That's a good question. I think there is a separation between the US military and Americans. Yeah, there would be a definite separation. But there is, how are we viewed? Like so many different things come to mind in that question, with that question. The, the population. Yeah. Yeah. So I think they're pretty good at separating. I think right now it's a little bit more complicated again because we're a little bit associated with Europe and France. And so and there's a definite, disdain for France in particular. And so sometimes we as NGOs, like my presence there, people will just mistaken me as as a French person. Yeah. Yeah. But mostly there's a separation. And I have to say, the US military does make an attempt to do good work there. Up in Agadez, where they had a base, I think they build a couple dozen schools up there. So they weren't, people liked them. They didn't necessarily trust them, but they liked them and they did see these good works that they're doing. But I think when the U.S. military does this, and this makes sense, like when they build the schools, it's more because they want to be accepted there. It's not to solve problems per se. Although individuals, I know people in the military who were part of those activities, and they cared passionately about the people and wanted, to see their lives be made better. So, yeah. Disinformation. Yes. Well, exactly. I mean, it's all over the world. And yeah, exactly. I thought the same thing when I was looking at that. I thought, I think we get disinformation in the United States as well. And you're right, all over the world. So, so what hope do we have? I gave you kind of the story on this. What hope do we have for the Sahel? Anybody like how can we see slivers of light in that region? Does anybody see any slivers of light? I'm not sure I gave you too many, but um, anybody have any ideas of where maybe we can find a little bit of hope? Okay, I'll give them to you. It's okay. like, so there are a lot of youth in the Sahel region, right? This is an enormous resource that should be taken advantage of. I mean, we don't want to say these are lives, but think about the ingenuity, the energy, that comes with all of that, with 64.5% of the Sahel's 150 million people. They're young. And to me, that excites me, probably because I'm in the, the education sector. But I think there's so much untapped potential right there. The cultural strength, and we didn't get to talk about any of this, about really a lot of this, about the cultures. But despite all of the challenges, Sahelians have maintained their unique cultural identities, traditions, and languages, which demonstrates resilience. And I will tell you, the people of Niger are incredibly resilient. They amaze me with the patience that they exhibit on a daily basis. For them to only get one meal a day is like, that's life. That's just how it is, right? So they are they're amazing people. Resourceful economies. And so they have a history of trade. That whole Sahel belt there, that is basically Islam came in through that belt because of trade in salt, gold, and other commodities. And so I think there's resources there that can be utilized. They're going to have to adapt to climate change. And I think they could be the leaders in that area. How do we adapt to climate change? And then harnessing the past for the future, historical significance of the Sahel. And, it's which group of people was it? The Jarma, but the Songhai kingdom there. Back, thousands of years ago, it was the wealthiest kingdom in the world. And by today's standards, if you adjusted for today's standards and the inflation and all of that, it's still the wealthiest kingdom in the world. And I would have loved to have talked a little bit about that. But the history is there. We can't discount this region just because right now it's a difficult place. They definitely have the culture and the history to come back. So if I were going to prescribe something, if we want this region to improve, right? For me, and I'm coming at this with a bias, but I believe education is the key. Education is the key. Too many people, too many of the young people have not had the opportunity to go to school and to develop those skills that they need to be successful. And so looking at, we need to work with different groups, including governments, to make sure that there are enough schools for the children of the Sahel region. And from my experience, a big challenge to children receiving education is the fact that there just simply are not enough classrooms. We need to build more classrooms. And I think of this quote, that when is the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. What's the second best time? Today. And I think of education as that tree. And I love that analogy actually because you don't get to see the fruit of your labor for about 20 years or a generation with education. But we really need to focus on education in this part of the world. And I think we need to, the other block to really good education, particularly I can say for Niger, is the fact that it's a lot of, when you do go to school, it's a lot of rote education, a lot of memorization. So we need to help put in activities that promote critical thinking skills. So as an organization, that's what we're doing. Those are actually two of our primary goals as an organization, is build classrooms and then also put in a STEM initiative, which is basically critical thinking. And then partner with local teachers and educational institutions to make sure the teachers are well trained. And then this is another thing that we didn't talk about too much, but solar power. There's a lot of sun over there. And I think that's something that as, you know, the technology improves, we really need to take more advantage of. I have a house in Niger and it's totally solar powered. But I can it's expensive, right? Like the initial investment is expensive. So we need to find ways that we can maybe make it less expensive and make it more accessible to people in these countries. And then youth development programs. So this is some of what we do as well, where we have activities like running clubs, entrepreneur programs, school gardens, all of that helps. It's an investment that'll reap rewards in the future. And then we talk about water and sustainability, again, the solar power. So one of the things we do, this is actually at one of our schools, we do solar powered wells. But the reality I know in Niger is that most people don't have access, half of all people don't have access to clean water. But the water's there. Some of the biggest aquifers in the world are under the Sahara Desert. We just need to access it. But the potential is there. The hope is there. Women, we know, statistics show us that when you invest in girls and women, if you want change, that's where your investment should be. And that's another area where we as an organization, and I think in general, we need to invest more. And then vocational training also. So we do have some schools that we support where it is vocational training, and we would like to do more of that. And then health and well-being, school-based health and nutrition, set up clinics for students and families, and school meal programs. So we're getting to the end of our time here. I just wanted to tell you a story, end with a story, because I think it exemplifies very well the way education can impact lives and ripple out. And I think it provides hope for the future. This is Shehu. He's right here in the middle. He is at a church. He's a church leader, one of our school partners. And on one of the trips, we were sitting around talking, and I asked Shehu, you know, why did you want to start a school in your community? And the story he told me was so interesting. When he was a little boy, his brother would herd the cows and goats for a missionary couple. And one day he and his mother went to collect money from this missionary couple. And the way he tells the story is he says, I knocked on the door of the missionary house and the woman opened the door. And she looked right at me and she said, do you want to go to school? And he said, I said, yes. And he said, you know, that changed my life because I got to go to the missionary school, which was a boarding school. And he did so well there that he got a scholarship to go on to middle school, high school. And then he got a scholarship to go to Nigeria, where he became an English teacher. Came back, fast forward, he worked in administration, he worked for the government, worked at a public schools, got into administration, and at this point, he's retiring. He's right at the end of his career. And he said, you know, Kara, for me, I wanted to be able to ask the children in my community the same question that missionary asked me. Do you want to go to school? And he's doing that. These schools that he has started, he's now started 2 schools because he was at this particular church kind of in the middle of the country. And they started a school, which by the way, now has, I think it's 570, is that right, Julie? 570 students in elementary school. And it's like the most joyful place you'll go. Like all our schools are wonderful, but this particular school is just like full of joy. And then when he retired, he went back to his home community and he promptly started another school up there through his church up there. And that school's doing very well too. It's through 6th grade also. And I love this story because it's the ripple effect of education, right? he was given an opportunity, and then he wanted to do the same thing for his community. And who knows, those 570 students or 1,000 students, who knows, maybe they'll start schools. But what we do know for sure is that it'll ripple out into the community. And I think that's how the change happens. I think in the Sahel, we can't just look for quick fixes. We have to plant the trees now. And then in the future, we'll reap the rewards of, of that hard labor. So I'm going to end right there. We've got about 15 minutes left, 13 minutes left for questions and discussion. I know you all have like amazing experience. So if you have anything you want to add to the discussion, it doesn't have to be a question. I would love to hear what you have to say. Yes.
I think the likelihood of Islam coming down from the north and just derailing all of this.
In Niger. I don't think that it will be the issue in Niger, but I can't predict the future. The thing about Niger is that it has a tradition of religious freedom. And so I think the people there I don't think they would accept that by and large. I don't think that they accept Sharia law. Like Ibrahim, the story that we told, I think that for him, it just didn't set right. And I think at the end of the day, people would not allow that. I think this is my hope. I tend to be optimistic, but I think that it'll be. I don't think that'll take these schools out. Yeah. What do you think? You're like-
Yeah, my the gun here. You say no, bam. And they're not.
That's true. That's true. But for them, like in the moment, that's true in the moment. But I don't think in the long term that would be something that would stick in Niger. I don't see it. People like they take pride in the freedoms that they have. They take pride in being a peaceful country. Often in Niger, people will say, well, we're not Nigeria. I mean, you saw that map it's just constant violence. And so a lot of this, sometimes I think of Niger as, and I hope this continues, kind of the eye of a hurricane. There's a lot going on around it, but it has stayed relatively stable. I know. We'll see. We'll see what happens, but I really believe in my heart that things change quickly. I've watched things change quickly. So, yeah.
Is there anything being done to affect the population explosion? Maybe control it or reduce it or help in some way?
Yeah, it's a great question. So one of the, how can I say, so many different, when you ask that question, so many different things come to mind. Definitely with education. So the number of children that a woman has, that rate goes down as the education level goes up for women or for girls. It also, the age that they get married. Right now, 2/3 of girls in Niger are married before the age of 18. But a big part of the reason for that is because of the lack of education. Because we know that women will get married later, the more education that they have, the more years of education that they have. So that's a big part of it right there, I would say, as far as population rate. Like we need education. Again, I hate to be solely focused on that, but that's a big part of it. It's complicated in Niger, though, I imagine across the Sahel, because it's an agrarian society. And so we know here in the United States, the same thing, like when you're farmers, like you need a lot of helping hands, right, out in the fields. And so people, I think it's out of need as well, that there's a high child mortality rate. So if you have 7 kids, how many of those are going to die? Before the age of 5, but then even beyond that. I mean, everybody I know has at least 2 or 3 siblings who has passed away, like my age. And so I feel like you're going to have to, it's going to be a slow change as far as that rate coming down. Again, I think sometimes in the aid world, we're just too quick to look for those quick fixes. And we think, oh, this is the magic bullet that's going to fix everything. I don't think it works that way. I don't think real change works that way. I think Shehu demonstrates that, this is one child 40, 50, 60 years ago. And now there's 2 schools that are, 1,000 students. But that was 60 years of investment in one person. So it's going to take a while. Yeah.
Please wait for the microphone.
Oh, sorry. Go, yeah, here you go. Right here. Yep.
Do you spend most of your time raising funds?
Oh, good question. Thank you for that's a good question. I spend a lot of time raising funds. Yes, exactly. I'm here about 50% of the time, and I'm in Niger about 50% of the time. When I'm here, yes, that's exactly what I'm doing. Except for right now, I'm not raising, unless, I do have some brochures, but yeah, exactly. That's
I have a
right.
question.
Yeah.
And I wonder is there anything from the chat? Nothing from the chat.
Okay.
How safe do you feel in your home, in your region, when you are home?
Yeah. So let me say this. I feel relatively safe. I'll start with that. I think I have watched from 2006 to now, I have watched the security situation degrade in very real ways. And one of the ways is that right now I can't travel outside of Niamey without authorization from the government and this is true from the last couple of years, we have to have a military escort to go anywhere as someone from outside of Niger. As far as so right now I'm pretty much in Niamey, in the capital. I feel relatively safe there. I think it's a little bit, we mitigate the risk as much as possible. I do have security guards at my house. We don't advertise, we do nothing on social media. I don't do anything from social media to let people know where I am, where I'm going to be. We do the, very basic things to make sure that we stay secure. I primarily have Nigerian friends who I'm hanging out with. I think that helps. But sometimes I think, I've said to my Nigerian friends, oh, they probably don't even notice me. And they're like, oh, they know exactly everybody knows where you are, what you're doing. So yeah, I can't totally answer that question, but as a Christian, I would say, I remember when I was in Kenya, we were in a area that was kind of by the Somali border. And so bandits would come down to that area too. And we had to have armed guards there as well. And I remember asking the missionary about this, and she said to me, Kara, what I believe is the safest place to be is in God's will. And so I always take that with me. I'm like, okay, I do believe this is God's will. So and it's not to say bad things can't happen, but yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Here, got one right here.
I came interested in coming to this class because a woman who I've come to admire so much goes to Africa,
Okay.
has been to 2 different states in Africa, but they're south of where you were.
Okay.
And she is so enthusiastic about giving. She has been made a pastor in the Assembly of God Church.
Great.
And she's from Holland.
Oh,
And
great.
She's coming back soon to visit this
Okay.
area. But she inspires me so much to know more about Africa,
Mhm.
just because it's not one country in a sense that all
Yes.
states are united, but
Yeah.
it made me more curious about
What's
at
going
all
on.
that.
And well, and let me say, so this part of Africa is very different than other parts. Yes, I would definitely want to say that don't, be afraid to travel to other parts of Africa, because what you're saying, I thought the same thing when I was in Kenya. I thought, oh, it's Africa. And you've traveled around Africa. We know, even from Burkina Faso to Niger, the culture is very, very different, or Nigeria and Niger, even though it's the same people group, in the north of Nigeria, it's very different the way they see the world. And so, yeah, I mean, you make an excellent point.
And also, I want to tell people that history is important.
Yes.
I've gotten into the computer on television has about the development of the world in different ways. And I've learned so much from them.
Yeah.
Because they talk about in the biblical times, how the way, why people moved,
Yeah.
and it was because of climate and things like
Yes.
that, the
Yeah.
changes that were going on, and that relates to us now.
Yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah.
that, that's how things happened.
Yeah,
you know,
it's
and if
it's the
you
way of the world.
totally,
Yeah.
You know, gosh, this isn't the first time that happened. And what happened after that? Where are we now?
Yeah. Yeah. That's right. That's right.
But it's-
Exactly. Things get better. Yeah.
And I have to go back and watch things over and over again because I
Yeah.
fall asleep in between.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. Yeah.
A question from online. Could you please talk about the Chinese influence?
Oh, yeah. So we didn't even really get into the Chinese. Oop, I don't know if that microphone, if I need to back up. Yeah, so the Chinese, I can very briefly say, I'm not an expert on this area, but they need resources, right? And so all over Africa, they're coming in and they're buying resources. I would say they're buying them. They, like in Niger, they are taking the oil out of Niger, and they have a contract with Niger for the oil. And I mean, I could talk for a long time about that, but I'll stick with that. The Chinese have done quite a lot in the area of development in Niger. They've put in a couple bridges, water towers, they pave roads. So in my mind, it's really no different than what the US does. There's actually in Niger, over the Niger River in Niamey, there's the Kennedy Bridge. And that's because John F. Kennedy gave the money for that bridge. So we do very similar things. Like we have our, as we were talking about, our own strategic interests. And so we'll do development for those interests. Now, I'm not comparing us to the Chinese as far as like the political and motivation and all of that. But I do want to say that, you know, the Chinese are definitely there. And I did just hear from a friend that they're having problems with the Niger government at the moment. And there is some chance that they too will have their issues. So, yeah, I can't say more without going into like a lot of time. So, yeah, go ahead. And then
When
this
the-
will probably be the last one, maybe. Yeah.
When the US military was there,
Mhm.
was the development people there?
The USAID.
Yeah, who built the schools?
Yes, that's a great question. Now, I'm not an expert in this area, but it was the military. It was not USAID that did that. Like, so it wasn't our development arm of the United States. It was the military. Like they have budgets for that type of activity. I also know, like when I was in Niger, at one point they did a whole campaign. The military did a campaign where they went out with doctors and nurses, and they did vaccines. I don't know if it was vaccines. I shouldn't say that out loud. But they were treating like dysentery, malaria, and different diseases. So they do have a budget for that. They seem to have a budget for that type of activity. And I think it's just, again, so that they'll be accepted in this society, so that people will see that there's a benefit to them being there. Yeah.
Superb presentation.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind. Thank you. Appreciate that. I will say this is the first type of presentation I've done like with this, which you could probably tell I was a little choppy, but you were a great audience. So thank you. I appreciate it.
We'd like to have you back again.
Oh,
We
and
would.
then I would love to like go into like maybe more of the history and stuff. I think that would, because you're right. Like, okay, that would be fantastic. So
Thank you,
yeah,
Kara.
thank you.